Okay, good afternoon. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. Today I'm very thrilled and honored to have with me as my guest, my repeat guest actually, Leigh Steinberg, the preeminent sports agent. Leigh, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Richard.
So, Leigh, I want to start by asking you, obviously you have been representing sports athletes for, 40 years, something like that. What is the biggest change that you've seen from when you started in this business as a young man to what you're seeing today?
Well, last year was my 48th draft. So I started in 1975. The first change is obviously the economics, because in the explosion of television. So when 3 networks were replaced by hundreds of different options on cable and satellite, it meant many more sports contests on television, many more highlight shows, opinion shows, and the rights fees went from every team in the National Football League making $2 million as their share of the national contract in 1976 to $200 million last year. And it's meant franchise values have gone up from $16.5 million in 1976 with Tampa and Seattle to $5 billion today. And brand new stadium and jumbo scoreboards. The other big change has been the expansion of social media and the internet. So we have the currency for endorsements and for information exchange all happening over Twitter and Instagram and TikTok, and that being the primary way in which people communicate. And it's been a veritable explosion. So if Rip Van Winkle had gone to sleep in 1975 and awakened in 2022, he would be absolutely mind-boggled by the tableau that he sees today.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit, how did you get into this business? Was this a childhood dream, or how did you get into becoming a sports agent exactly?
No, really, Richard, there was no field of sports agency when I began. Teams could hang up the phone because there was no established right of representation and just say, we don't deal with agents. So when I was growing up, my father had 2 core values. One was treasure relationships, especially family. And the second was try to make a meaningful difference in the world and help people who couldn't help themselves. So I was sort of hardwired to try to be a civil rights or civil liberties attorney, try to make an impact in the world in a meaningful way. And so I went to UCLA for a year and then to Berkeley. I was student body president when Ronald Reagan was governor in the late 60s. And every time we demonstrated against the war, he cracked down, and I learned everything I needed to learn about negotiating from interacting with then governor, later President Reagan. And I was a dorm counselor in an undergrad dorm, working my way through law school, and they moved the freshman football team into the dorm. And one of the students was Steve Bartkowski, the quarterback. He ended up a couple years later in 1975 being selected as the first pick overall in the NFL draft. And I was choosing between different jobs. I probably would have gone to work for the Alameda County DA, and he asked me to represent him. So there I was, brimming with legal experience, never having practiced before, and I had the first pick in the draft. And there was a World Football League competing against it, and we got the largest rookie contract in NFL history. So we flew down to Atlanta to sign the contract the next day, and there were Klieg lights flashing in the sky at the airport like for a movie premiere, and a huge crowd was pressed up against the police line. And the first thing we heard was, we interrupt the Johnny Carson show to give you a special news bulletin. Steve Bartkowski and his attorney have just arrived at the Atlanta airport. We switch you live for an in-depth interview. Well, I knew we weren't in Berkeley anymore, and but I saw the tremendous idol worship and veneration that athletes are held in communities across the country. And I thought, if the athletes would go back and retrace their roots and set up a scholarship fund at the high school or work with a church or Boys and Girls Club, and then go back to the university and have the alums as mentors by doing what a Troy Aikman did at UCLA, which is establishing a scholarship fund. And then at the professional level, set up a charitable foundation with the leading business figures, political figures, and community leaders, and attack some problem. So Warwick Dunn, a former running back, just put the 200th single mother and their family into the first home they'll ever own by making the down payment and outfitting it. That programs like that could teach an athlete non-athletic skills, but also make a real difference in the quality of life in the community. So that was 48 years ago.
So what's the reason you, or maybe there's a good reason why you've just focused on, is it really NFL and quarterbacks? I mean, what's the reason you don't represent other athletes in other leagues? Is it because you want to be specialized, or tell me about that?
No, we did have a big baseball practice with my partner, Jeff Morad. We had about 35 first-round draft picks. We had players like Matt Williams and Will Clark and Sean Green and Pudgy Rodriguez and Cece Sabathia and Manny Ramirez. And in basketball, a number of players. I did boxers like Lennox Lewis and Oscar De La Hoya. Matter of fact, with Lennox Lewis, I had him do a public service announcement that said, "Real men don't hit women." And that could do more to trigger behavioral attitudes in rebellious adolescents towards domestic violence than 1,000 authority figures ever could. And I did Olympic sports in the U.S. team, in the World Cup in soccer, and a variety of different sports. But in football, the quarterback's a dominant figure. And so whether it was Warren Moon or Troy Aikman or Steve Young or Drew Bledsoe or currently Tua Tagovailoa or Patrick Mahomes, those players tend to play the longest. They're great role models, and they are much more apt to do endorsements.
Well, there's obviously a ton of NFL teams. There's only one of you. How do you decide, who to work with? I mean, I'm sure your phone is ringing off the hook constantly.
So it really is a process. First of all, I have a great younger CEO named Chris Cabot, who's very talented. We have about 8 younger agents who work with us. But the answer is to try to profile and screen people before taking them as clients, and looking for work ethic, looking for a sense of self-respect, but also looking for a big heart, people that have a charitable instinct, want to make a difference, and also are ambitious for second career, so that when sports comes to an end, they're going to go on and be a success in media or business, or there'll be someone like Brent Jones who used the fact that he played for the 49ers to network with people in Silicon Valley and put together a $4 or $5 billion hedge fund, or Steve Young, who did the same thing, or Bruce Smith, who put together a big construction company, or Troy Aikman, or Desmond Howard, who went into media. So you're looking for ambitious people who will go make an impact in the world.
So now, I mean, you've got a lot of people, younger people. What do you personally get still very involved in the day-to-day, or what? How do you kind of allocate your time? Now that you have a lot of younger agents helping you.
The younger agents do a lot of the day-to-day work, and we again have a CEO that runs it. But one of the projects I'm working on is we do agent academies. So we teach. We're going to do one in Las Vegas next month, November 13th, 14th, and 15th. So we teach we're trying to create a new generation of sports professionals who understand how to recruit, how to negotiate, how to set up a charitable foundation, how to market and brand. I've also been exploring the world, and I've aggregated a set of healing modalities that are products of breakthroughs in biomed. So they're things, protocols which can hype energy and productivity at key moments at the end of games. They can bring injured players back quicker. They can address the problem of concussion, which I've been trying to find awareness, prevention, and cure on for about 30 years. They can help with cognition. So they're of use in sports. They're hyperbaric oxygen, they're light stem, they're stem cells, they're a cognitive process called RTMS, or Dr. Tommy Shaver's neuroplasticity. But it's a group of cutting edge technologies, so you and I can live longer, healthier, but also with better memory and better neurotransmitter processing. And so I'm bringing those into sports, but also for all us baby boomers who want to have a long run here.
Are you an athlete yourself by chance or not?
Am I?
Were you an athlete? Are you an athlete?
Oh, just running track.
Okay.
Football's a traffic accident on every play, and I'm afraid I don't have the bodily structure. If most people played football and got hit once, they'd be in bed for a week.
Yeah, right. Now tell me, is the movie Jerry Maguire, I think that movie was modeled after your career, your life, your personality. Is it accurate? What would you say about it?
Well, it's not biographical because I started with the first player in the draft. That's not much of a arc of tragedy and triumph.
Right.
But Cameron Crowe, director, author, had gone into a high school in Southern California and pretended he was a student to write a book called Pastimes at Ridgemont High. And I thought that the book and the movie were very funny. And so he asked me if he could follow me around to do a film based on a sports agent. So back in 1993, he followed me to the NFL draft where I had the first pick. He followed me to the league meetings in Palm Desert where I was showing off a free agent. He followed me to pro scouting day at USC. He came to a series of games with me. He spent a lot of time in my office. He came to Super Bowls and my Super Bowl parties. He sat there when I did some negotiations. He was a fly on the wall, and I told him stories, lots and lots of stories. So the stories got incorporated into, and then he went off and he wrote a script. So my job as technical advisor was to vet the script, Richard, to make sure that the willing suspension of disbelief that holds you in a motion picture didn't get fractured. So you didn't think the script was unrealistic or the look was unrealistic. And then he gave me actors like Cuba Gooding Jr. and I took him to the Super Bowl for a week. He had to pretend he was my client, and he was a wide receiver with Amani Toomer and Desmond Howard. And then I actually had to show the quarterback in the film, played by Jerry O'Connell, how to throw a spiral because he had gone to NYU and they didn't have football there. So there's a lot of life up there on the screen. And for the last 25 years, people have run up to me in airports or come up at dinner and asked me to say 4 words or said them to me, which start with, "Show me the..."
Very funny. So what stage do you typically like to start working with the clients? Is it when they're in college or after they're in the draft or later on in their career? What's the usual entry point that you start working with these athletes?
So for all these years, it has been a college athlete preparing for the draft. And so the 2 rules have been that in order to retain college eligibility, someone can't have an agent while they have eligibility left. They can't sign with an agent. They can't take something of value for an agent. So that would be defined as the last collegiate game. So when that gun goes off at the last game, or if they play in a bowl game, then they can sign with an agent. And then you would help them train for the scouting process and help them through the scouting process and prepare them for the draft, and then mentor them into their career, negotiate their contract, and support them through their career. This all changed in July of 2021. California passed SB 206 a couple of years ago, which said that athletes could now hire, for the process of name, image, and likeness, a marketing agent. And that meant that amateur athletes, for the first time, could do endorsements as early as birth. And so all of a sudden, for the last year, we've had the ability of college athletes to hire marketing agents to do endorsements for them. And this all started when Nick Saban, who traditionally was a conservative coach at Alabama football, said in a press conference that his quarterback, Bryce Young, had made who hadn't played a game for Alabama, and this was a year ago, had made $1 million in endorsements. And normally Nick Saban would have spun down and said, no, this is a young player, don't have too many expectations for him. But the reason he was doing that was for recruiting, to say, if you come to Alabama, you can make that money too. So not just football quarterbacks, but you have the head of Nike, Phil Knight, went ahead and did stipends for every athlete at Oregon. You have Jack in the Box did 15 stipends for athletes with the first name Jack. You had alums across the country form collectives so that USC alums with businesses use those businesses to do endorsements for SC players. And now it's being used as a recruiting inducement for players coming to schools. So the alums can tell them, if you come to Alabama or SC or Ohio State or Michigan, we've got X amount of deals for you. So the whole tradition of amateur athletes has been completely changed in the last years. So now all of a sudden, if I don't spot the talented high school junior quarterback and go to him and offer an NIL package, I might never get a chance to talk to him when he was a junior. Now, the rule for the NFL is a player can't enter the draft for 3 years after his high school class graduates. So he's not eligible for the draft to come into the pros for that, but he's eligible to do NILs anytime. So you will now have agents going to maternity wards at hospitals looking for healthy mothers.
Interesting. So how many clients do you typically add every year? Like, is it a lot or is it just a handful?
Well, the key is to add the right clients. And so in a game like football, you want to add 3 or 4 or 5, so you have enough time to be able to nurture every one of them. It's not a matter of how many you could sign going in, it's would you have those clients years later. So someone like Warren Moon, I went 23 years with. He played 6 years in Canada and 17. So you would like to have those players later. 12 of the players I work with in football are in the Hall of Fame. So you'd like to be able to go all the way through the career with them. So sometimes less is more. Basketball is a sport where you cannot have massive numbers of clients because basketball players require more nurturing and care.
Hmm. But it sounds like you tend to work with players even after their professional careers ended. Is that correct? That's
Well,
what it
you'd
sounds
like
like.
to have a lifelong relationship with them, and you'd
Mm-hmm.
like to be involved in various aspects of their life.
Mm-hmm. How has the draft changed too? I mean, you talk a little bit about that. I mean, obviously you've been following that for 48 years. Tell me a little bit how that's changed.
So when I started back in 1975, the football draft was in January, and it was an obscure event. It was
Mhm.
important to teams, but you couldn't follow it. And now it's turned into draft week, which is covered on two television networks, heavily promoted, a whole series of events. It moves from city to city. The draft used to be 17 rounds, and now it's 7.
Hmm.
Uh, Basketball used to have a large series of rounds, now it's 2. So the amount of rounds have been cut back,
Hmm.
and but it's been turned into a major event. So it's a big television event. It's heavily sponsored. It's got all sorts of ancillary events. It's built for both basketball and football as an off-season event
Hmm.
that brings a lot of attention. There are draft shows, draft analysis, there are books, there are draft sites on the internet, because it encompasses not simply the fans of the pro teams, it's the college fans too who follow what players will come off. So it's a big branding
Hmm.
event, and
Hmm.
the players are very careful with getting the right tailor, how they're gonna look. You have draft parties that are sponsored, so that
Hmm.
uh, Beats by Dre will sponsor someone having a draft party at their home, and they'll brand the right look and the right products. So it's from something where an athlete might get a call from a team, and you might see the next day the results in the paper. It's now become circus,
Hmm.
and in the city where the draft is occurring, um, they may have a couple 100,000 people in the street, like having a fiesta or a circus.
Hmm. Now, do you personally watch all the games and keep up to with the stats of all your clients and read all the press? And how actively involved are you with the games during the season?
The answer is yes. So players want to know that you follow them. So you'd like to go to games, which uh, you'd like to see your key players at home, because you'd like to get a sense of the environment.
Hmm.
How many people are wearing your clients' jerseys? What
Hmm.
does the marketing look like? What is the press like about your clients? You'd like to get a sense of the environment and be clued in on that. Athletes like their representatives to see them. It's a great opportunity to bond with the families and to be with. Uh, every athlete is surrounded by an extended family of
Hmm. Hmm.
parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and friends and coaches and former coaches. So there's a massive infrastructure around that, and it's an opportunity to talk to team owners and executives and all of the people around. And sometimes players are injured, and you'd like to be clued in with that process. And so the answer is yes. It's not every single weekend, but you'd be clued in on the stats and the defensive stats. And fortunately, if you don't go to a game in football, there's something called red zone that focuses on every scoring drive. So, or they have a process been on DirecTV that allows you to see every single game simultaneously. So, you can watch all that, and there's a MLB baseball network, much easier than than in the past. And even if you're at a stadium watching one client, there are ways you can see a lot of other games going on.
Now, Leigh, it strikes me that, you've been doing this for a long time, but you seem like you're motivated. It's not about money. It's just because you just love this job. I mean, tell me about that. I assume you could have retired a long time ago if you wanted to, but you just love what you do and you want to keep doing it. Is that accurate?
Oh, I think so. And again, we have, if we didn't have Chris Cabot and younger agents who do a lot of the hands-on work, it might be different. But but I keep my hand in, and I love it. And part of it is there are new charitable programs, and so Patrick Mahomes has 15 in the Mahomies. Hsu Untied set up his charitable foundation. So they keep doing good works, and they keep making a difference in the world. And we can focus on every problem in the world, whether it's domestic violence or bullying or sex trafficking, or I'll give you an example. I created something called the Sporting Green Alliance. So we know that the environment is an issue in climate change. So aggregated sustainable technologies in wind, solar, recycling, resurfacing, and water to go to stadia, arena, and practice fields, and reduce carbon emissions and energy costs, and turn those venues into educational platforms. So the hundreds of millions of fans that go can see a waterless urinal or a solar panel and think about how to integrate those concepts into their own homes and businesses. So you put sports in the forefront of rolling back climate change. I've been very concerned with the issue of concussion. So I had a crisis of conscience back in the late 80s because I'm representing half the starting quarterbacks and they keep getting hit in the head. And we'd go to doctors and ask, how many are too many? What's the magic number? And they didn't have answers. So I started holding concussion conferences with leading neurologists across the country and made sure that the players at least understood the implications. And eventually we got to, and I've held 17 of them, and we got to the point where the doctors told us 3 or more leads to an exponentially higher rate of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, premature senility, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and depression. So I've called it a ticking time bomb and an undiagnosed health epidemic. And so it's an existential threat to football, because if 50% of the moms and dads in the country know the extent of the relationship and tell their teenage boys not to play tackle football and tell them you can play any sport but not tackle football, it won't kill football, but it'll turn it into a gladiator sport where only those people that have huge economic challenges will play it, and just like boxing or UFC.
Yeah, interesting. Well, Leigh, it's been wonderful chatting with you. I appreciate your taking the time. I know how busy you are, but it's just great to talk to you every time. And I love the fact that you're still doing what you're doing, and that you love doing it, and that you're doing all this other interesting and charitable stuff.
Thank you, Richard.
This is Richard Hsu and Leigh Steinberg. Thank you.